We are here to launch the Tobacco Industry Interference Report for 2025. I will not get much into what this report is because Prof. Mbongo is going to explain what the report entails and what it is. The objectives of the launch are simply to present the findings of the report, what we found in the period when we were assessing Botswana, how Botswana has performed in terms of tobacco industry surveillance and monitoring. One of the things that we do as a civil society organization is to be a watchdog, is to assess and to observe tobacco companies that are trading in Botswana, tobacco companies that are importing their product into the country in terms of how they are operating in our jurisdiction. You will keep hearing the words FCTC. That is the Bible of tobacco control. Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. It is the guiding principle behind why we do what we do. It has a number of articles that guide how governments, civil society, the public are supposed to interact with tobacco companies. And so it is that guiding principle, Article 5.3, that guides us in terms of how governments are supposed to operate, how they are supposed to interact with tobacco companies, how they are supposed to perceive and how they are supposed to treat tobacco companies. So this report was basically assessing that performance in terms of how we are performing as a country. And we will get into how we have performed, the results, and all that in the next coming presentation. The session also aims to stimulate dialogue. We are in a season where, as Anti-Tobacco Network, we feel we have been slacking as a country. We passed the Tobacco Control Act in 2021, and 5 years later, we are still at a point where the act is just sitting at the Ministry of Health, not being implemented. So we are hoping to stimulate that dialogue in terms of how do we then stimulate that act to be implemented. So that is basically why we are here this afternoon. And with those few words, ladies and gentlemen, and I thank you for your presence this afternoon.
Acknowledge Professor Mbongwe and your team, the team from the World Health Organization, Dr. Bobby Khosiamang and the team from the MOH, different friends and partners from various civil society entities, some from the University of Botswana here present this afternoon, and an older sister of mine from the great village of Mosetse. I think it's quite nice when you pick a fellow villager from where you come from, especially when where you come from is a particularly small village in terms of the population, but nevertheless a village that tends to punch above its weight. So I just want to appreciate everyone who's here for the good work that you all are doing. And let me also extend my greetings and appreciation to those who have joined us or who are joining us online. We are quite pleased to be with you this afternoon. Professor Mbongwe, this launch of the report is an important activity. So important that I should have been on my way to Jukwi, where I'm supposed to spend a bit of time tomorrow, starting in the morning, with the elderly. But because what you're doing is commendable at that level, I had to, cancel and ensure that I travel much later, since we had to be here to do work that is quite important. And Treasure, you seem to be a bit unsure when you are speaking. Yes, I do not smoke. So, because you spoke about smoking and then you seem to pause a bit and wonder. No, I don't smoke. So, ladies and gentlemen, and esteemed international speakers from across the globe, Dr. Mary Asunta from the Global Center for Good Governance in Tobacco Control, Professor Likam from the Africa Center for Tobacco Industry Monitoring and Policy Research, and Mr. Mohi from the Africa Tobacco Control Alliance, the WHO country representative. I hear our good friend Dr. Fabian Danzago is not around, though he has a rep, Gaborone. Directors from the different ministries here present, civil society organizations, as I've already mentioned, members of the media, and the team that is responsible for putting this together. I want to say to you that this event is not just timely, it is critically relevant as we approach the World No Tobacco Day, which is the 31st of May, 2026. And I hope with a bit of time, we are going to make this day more fashionable amongst our people. And this year, the day carries a vital theme, which is Unmask the Appeal, Countering Tobacco and Nicotine Addiction. This theme serves as a powerful reminder to us all to critically analyze the tactics employed, especially by tobacco and nicotine industries that ensnare our youth in cycles of addiction. The marketing of vaping products as safer alternatives to traditional smoking creates a false sense of security, particularly among young people, and not only as safer alternatives, but then also as alternatives that are cool, alternatives that are flavored in manner that makes it seem as though one is actually not indulging in a tobacco product. So we need to all look into this such that we can equally be up to the task by looking at tobacco intake, not only from a traditional sense, but also in the newer ways that a lot of young people are being ensnared into. Because I am a cowboy, and I followed a lot of what happened in the American Wild West. Cowboys in the 50s and 60s, and before then in the 40s, used to chew tobacco. Like they would chew tobacco, and then, with the years, they would have their teeth becoming not just yellow, but actually quite dark. So that made tobacco back then unattractive to women. So a tobacco company back then, and because it was a public campaign, I can mention them, Marlboro, started to advertise filter cigarettes. And when they did this very particularly attractive advertising campaign, they called it the Marlboro Cowboy. So they would put out great adverts, welcome to Marlboro country. And then they'd have a cowboy looking cool with a filter cigarette. And over time, it was shown that through that campaign, a lot more cowboys started actually smoking than ever before. And he didn't stop at that. Because now the cigarettes were thinner and they looked more cool. A lot more young women started actually also smoking. So the industry is perpetually innovating. So what you see today with electronic cigarettes, with vaping and the likes, is actually the continuation of a trend that has been there almost forever. So we need to be in a position where we are forward-looking, and we are also in a position where we can counter what is happening. When I speak about countering what is happening, you look into the evidence of what is actually happening in our country and across the world. According to the Global School-Based Student Health Survey of 2024, 11.1% of students aged between 13 and 17 reported using electronic cigarettes, with tobacco use overall among this age group standing at around 12%. And this should be alarming, because some of these are kids who are 12 and even below, who are actually reporting to be using this. And one of the key things that should worry us is that amongst a lot of adolescents, using vapes and electronic cigarettes is not quite perceived as smoking. Note that a point of departure, whereas a traditional cigarette would have been seen as smoking and therefore seen as a rather unacceptable thing to do, something that you do but you know you shouldn't be doing. With vaping and electronic cigarettes, kids do not quite categorize it or do not quite see it as, taking a tobacco product. In fact, they see it as taking something that actually makes you rather cool. For those of you who've been at the University of Botswana, Professor and others, it's not uncommon for someone to, walk around school vaping. It's not uncommon for people to vape also in public places where we otherwise would say you don't smoke in public. So there is a big challenge when it comes to this category of tobacco products. And these statistics actually underscore a public health crisis that aligns perfectly with all things you do not quite want to be promoting. We are speaking of non-communicable diseases being a problem. We are speaking of an era where we should promote prevention of a curing of diseases. And this says to us then that we need to be doing a lot more to reduce these significant health risks to our youth. As we launch the 2025 Tobacco Industry Index report today, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment to build momentum in our fight against the deceptive tactics of the industry, as I've mentioned. And if we are not going to be ahead of the industry, even though I know they're significantly much more funded in their campaigns, then we are going to have a lot of threats to our healthcare system as a whole. I am happy that this report illuminates the pervasive influence and the profound threats that these tactics of the industry pose to our public health policies and especially to our young people. At this juncture, I therefore would like to recognize the invaluable contributions of the Anti-Tobacco Network and other civil society organizations that are serving not only in our country, but globally. Your relentless advocacy serves as a vital reminder to the government regarding the implementation of the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control and the implementation guidelines for Article 5.3 of the FCTC. Your efforts are crucial, as it is clear that the government alone cannot achieve the goals set forth by these frameworks. Collaborative engagement and strong partnerships are essential for a successful outcome in combating tobacco-related issues. And I dare say that without solidarity, without these networks, we may not be able to do the work that you'd like us to do. Because we face a duplicity of actors who are pushing back. And this would be the industry itself, and to some extent also, even those that would have been ensnared into indulging in tobacco, who have been made to believe that it actually relieves stress, it makes you more calm, and it gives you all of those other benefits. The therapeutic so-called benefits, which actually can be driven from other sources that are less harmful to the health of those who partake in smoking. So we need to be aware that we are fighting multiple stakeholders, some of them spending a lot of money in ensuring that people do actually smoke. While I am proud to highlight Botswana's recognition with the Integrity Award in Panama for our commitment to tobacco control, we must also acknowledge the reality reflected in the 2025 Tobacco Industry Index report, that despite receiving this honor, our standing has not quite improved, primarily due to delays in our implementation of the Tobacco Control Act of 2021, which then remains the big challenge, not only to me, but also to you. And I've said, running a country is a difficult undertaking. You run it with so many and for so many, sometimes conflicting interests. Yet we need to move forward. So I am hoping that you're going to continue to put pressure. And I can say also that on our side, we will go back and dust the report, and then maybe convene a meeting with yourselves on how best we can actually move for adoption. It is not in your interest, and it is not in my interest to be dishonest. Putting these together, implementing sometimes very good policies and frameworks is not always easy. But it is in our collective interest that we ensure that we implement the regulations. And these regulations are an exemplary piece of legislation that equips us to address a lot of the pressing challenges that I've already mentioned. And we do know that the world is looking towards us as best practice, and we need to ensure that we demonstrate that our law works and that we are implementing the law. The trends that have been identified in the Global School-Based Student Health Survey of 2024 illustrates that the grip of tobacco and nicotine addiction can only be broken through decisive actions that reflect our commitment to the World No Tobacco Day theme. And as your Assistant Minister of Health, I want to say to you that I am dedicated to prioritizing the signing of the necessary regulations to facilitate swift implementation of the Tobacco Control Act, because I am acutely aware that these regulations would actually enable us to deal with these challenges swiftly, with urgency, and with determination. As we prepare, therefore, to commemorate this vital day on May 31st, 2026, I want to once more urge you to unite our efforts and to not at any point in time feel dejected. I know sometimes when you feel like you've been knocking at the door for quite a while, you've been trying to make people see the obvious. You may get frustrated because you wonder, how is it that anyone is not quite able to see the dangers of tobacco? How is it that government cannot see? How is it that industry cannot see? How is it that the smokers themselves cannot see? And I understand. But be in a position where you keep knocking and you keep doing the good work that you are doing. As you continue with your passion to work, take solace and courage in that you could choose not to do anything, and the whole generation would literally go down the drain. You could choose not to do anything, and your country would continue to be in a position where it cannot even afford to get enough medication for some of the conditions that we could have actually avoided had we done the work that all of you are doing. I wish, therefore, close by encouraging all of us to commit to passionately continue to champion this mission, as in so doing, we honor not only those we aim to protect, but we also ensure a healthier future for our nation. And together with the support that we'll get, and we're getting from civil society as a whole, we can actually create a tobacco-free Botswana, fully aligned with aspirations of World Non-Tobacco Day. And I thank you so much for your work and for your attention. Thank you.
Minister, first let me just thank you so much that you made this time to come and attend this event. Not just attend, but prepare for it and give such a lovely speech, which when I looked at your face, I felt you meant it. Often we have speakers come, and a lot of times we feel like they are reading a speech and then it is not coming from their heart. And today I saw what you meant. And the fact that you came here to make this presentation to us needs a round of applause, colleagues. You said civil society must continue to put pressure on you or on government. I'm going to say we are not going to put pressure, but we are going to continue to strengthen the partnerships that we have had over the years to be where we are today. Because as civil society, our duty is to make sure that the government does that which it promised its people. We are not coming up with our own programs. We are simply supporting government initiatives. And so we will continue to support the initiatives by the government of Botswana. Thank you so much again for coming. Can I proceed? Yes. And so in my presentation, I just briefly give context, because most of us here are sitting here today and probably do not know what we mean by the tobacco industry in the first place. So first, let me just talk about who the tobacco industry is. So the tobacco industry is all about the tobacco manufacturers, the wholesale distributors, importers of tobacco products. That's who the tobacco industry is. And who represents them? It is all the entities and subsidiaries that engage in the manufacturing, the distribution, and sale of tobacco or tobacco-related products. It is also about entities working especially to further the interests of the tobacco industry through lobbying, advertising, legal advice, or similar activities. Those who were around during the negotiation of or coming up with the Tobacco Control Act of 2021, I think we have evidence, the supporters of the tobacco industry. and their entities being funded, supported, or influenced in their governance by tobacco-related entities, and their entities having tobacco industry or their representatives among their members. I just wanted to put context into so that we can understand who truly the tobacco industry is. And what is the main goal of the tobacco industry? Their goal is to maximize profits. They sell a product, remember, so that is the goal. The other goal is to block, weaken, or delay legislation and policies. Many countries have long wanted to come up with strong tobacco control policies or laws, but they have been blocked by the tobacco industry. We are very lucky that the government of Botswana has for a long time prioritized tobacco control, and we are here because of that commitment from the government sector. The tobacco industry also, their main goal is to create controversy. Controversy in that, and this is why everything that we do, including the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, is evidence-based. And so they come up with their own evidence, and therefore they create controversy. Controversy could be as simple as when you stop, like in our case, when you stop or when you license the street vendors to sell tobacco products, then you are perpetuating poverty. There is controversy already there because then other people will not see the public health interest in that. And then also they get a seat at the decision-making table. That's the other thing. This was just so you understand who these people are. And so how do we identify tobacco industry interference in government? It is when government allows tobacco industry to participate in policy development. Remember, they sell a product. So if you are coming up with a public health policy and they participate in that policy, clearly there is going to be some conflict. And when government allows the so-called corporate social responsibility activities, it is again when government gives benefits and preferential treatment to the tobacco industry. It is when government officials engage in unnecessary interactions with the tobacco industry. We'll talk some other day what unnecessary means, because there is a time when you do need to talk to the tobacco industry. When government meetings with the tobacco industry are not transparent. It is a requirement that when you meet with the tobacco industry, it is we get to know what you were talking about. And when government does not have preventive measures, that is now what we call tobacco industry interference. So what is Tobacco Industry Interference Index? It is a global survey on how governments respond to tobacco industry interference and protect their public health policies from the tobacco industry's commercial and vested interests. This is a WHO requirement. It is Article 5.3. Data based on this whole thing is publicly available. Everything that we report in this, it is publicly available, so that we tell the truth. When we say government has allowed the industry, we must show some evidence. Hence, we are sharing this report today. And the lower the score, the lower the overall level of interference. My colleagues, Mary and Mr. Mohi, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. So I think God helped me to be a little bit ahead and anticipate that there could be some problems. And so the global tobacco industry interference rates countries on their response to the tobacco industry through a survey questionnaire. And these countries are rated on 7 indicators of industry interference. I just shared with you what it is. And so those 7 are participation in policy development, tobacco industry corporate social responsibility, benefits to the industry, unnecessary interaction, measures for transparency, conflict of interest, and preventive measures. And so how did we do? In terms of indicator 1, so whether industry participates in policy development in Botswana, we did not find any evidence that the industry does, right? And because currently we have got the Act, the Tobacco Control Act of 2021, which prohibits collaboration, financial contributions, or policy influence from tobacco industry. And it prohibits acceptance, support, or endorsement of policies. And the evidence that we have that there was no interference is that in February 2025, government rejected a proposal from a delegation from the African Global Health, AGH, advocating for harm reduction. And harm reduction, this is also including issues of vaping pens and cigarettes. The idea was that government should also try to adopt that strategy. But the government rejected it, directing the company or the organization to the Tobacco Control Act of 2021. So that is great. And industry, again, in terms of the government allowing or inviting the tobacco industry to sit in government interagency, multi-sectoral committees, etc., we scored 5, which is high. That means we have a problem. And the problem, the evidence is here, that government of Botswana allows or invites the tobacco industry to participate in health policy, in policy committees. And the incidence is that Business Botswana is a member of the high-level consultative council. And we know that this is an entity that represents all the industries. And so if it does, clearly the tobacco industry will have a voice. And therefore, this can provide an input on key policy issues that affect the business environment, including tobacco. And does the government nominate or allow representatives of the tobacco industry to participate in government delegations? We did not find any evidence. In fact, the evidence that we have is that government does only invite civil society organizations like we were lucky to participate at the Conference of the Parties in Panama and the last one in Geneva, where we formed part of the government delegation. This is commendable, and this is how you see that's where we also received the Integrity Award that the minister talked about. Let's applaud the government of Botswana on that. And whether the government of Botswana and its agencies or officials endorse support or form partnerships, we did not find any evidence. And then again, now when it comes to whether the government and its agencies receive corporate social responsibility, yes, there is some evidence available. So the incidence is again, following several floods, again, we had some donations, some of which the government of Botswana received some of those donations. And evidence is there that we could see. It is not necessarily picking a particular tobacco industry, but because of the entity that represents the industries, we could place some evidence on that. And then again, when it comes to government accommodating requests from the tobacco industry, we did not find any evidence. But then when it comes to, does the government give privileges, incentives, tax exemptions, subsidies, etc., we found some evidence in there because the general incentive for manufacturing industries are available to all sectors. This means that they are also available to the tobacco industry. And so this also gives us an idea that we need to start looking at these issues in terms of how do we then make sure that we meet our obligations and not incentivize an organization or a company that produces products that are harmful to the people and therefore contradicting public health policies. And when it comes to top-level government officials, ministers meeting, fostering relations with the tobacco industry, we did not find any evidence. And whether the government accept assistance or offers, we did not find any evidence. However, a potential exists as the law is not yet implemented. Now, Honorable Minister, this is where, again, we're very happy of what you said. We need the law to get to work. It's been since 2021, and that law is gathering dust, and this is where now this report shows we need to get it to work. Whether the government publicly discloses meetings, we did not find any evidence. However, Botswana government, right, what we are saying also here is that, however, as of 2025, these provisions have not been fully implemented pending the adoption of the new regulations. Again, it's regulations, regulations, regulations. So I think we need to do something about the regulations. And then again, whether government prohibits contributions from the tobacco industry, yes, I think I gave some ideas already there. And then our act actually prohibits all these. The downside is that the provisions are not yet implemented. So we've got work to do. Retired government officials as forming part of the tobacco industry, we did not find any evidence. And also, do current government officials form part of tobacco industry? No evidence. And so, how then can Botswana protect itself from the tobacco industry? This is about my last slide. Botswana, we've got a good act. We've got to put it to work. And we also need to work on provisions or strategies that would require disclosures of the interactions of the meetings between government officials and the tobacco industry. because our act covers all these issues of prohibiting incentives and so forth. We need the regulations. I think the biggest solution here is that we need the regulations. So we need to expedite the development of the regulations, establish a centralized public repository through regulations to consolidate and publish tobacco industry data, ensuring public access to disclosures on government. And also we need to introduce a code of conduct for public officials through the regulations. And also we need to mandate annual training programs for government departments on Article 5.3. And also we need to clarify bans on corporate social responsibility and political contributions through regulatory guidelines. Thank you very much.
The Global Tobacco Industry Interference Index found that no country in the world is spared from interference. This is according to a survey of the 100 countries. It is just a matter of degree, high level of interference or lower levels of interference, and is indicated by the colors. So the lighter colors, yellow and green, indicates lower level of interference, while the colors red and purple and brown and maroon indicate higher levels of interference. The 2025 index found that the interference has increased and that the tobacco industry has become more aggressive. It exploited policy loopholes. It dissuaded and frustrated governments across the globe in their efforts to protect public health. So how does Botswana rank globally? The good news is Botswana ranked third globally out of 100 countries and came out tops among the 20 countries in Africa. However, yes, that really deserves a round of applause. And however, this does not mean that there is an absence of industry interference in Botswana and that you can rest. What it really means is that the tobacco industry will not rest and will target you and find loopholes or try to undo what you have achieved. That is why we do the index once every 2 years to keep track of improvements or deterioration of the country efforts. Across the globe, we documented 18 countries who strengthened protection of their policy by adopting or enforcing Article 5.3 measures. However, unfortunately, more than 60 countries, often influenced by the industry, failed to raise taxes, or they delayed the increase of taxes, or they lowered the rates, or they granted exemptions that benefited the tobacco industry. The issue that confronted many countries is industry lobbying governments to accept e-cigarettes and heated tobacco products. If not directly, then through front groups or individuals representing their business interests. But those countries who had banned e-cigarettes came under tremendous pressure to revoke the ban, sometimes through court cases, or to weaken regulations, or to oppose and delay tax increases on these products, or lobby policymakers to pass laws that are favorable to the industry. But there was good pushback by many governments, and at least 46 countries have banned e-cigarettes and heated tobacco products, including several countries in Africa, as indicated on this slide. But be cautious, because we know more recently 2 countries that have once banned e-cigarettes, including that is Bangladesh and Argentina. We heard that in recent times they actually reversed that ban. And for Bangladesh, they passed the legislation end of December, and several months later, the ban was actually reversed. So be cautious that the industry acts very, very quickly. You've also heard about the importance of denormalizing tobacco-related CSR activities. We know across the countries surveyed, 32 countries have banned tobacco-related CSR activities, and 5 of the countries do not accept contributions. But what the industry does is it targeted the non-health sector or the non-health agencies with its charity. It latched onto government priorities and appealed to willing ministers and parliamentarians to accept its donations of funds. So CSR is a form of promotion. So when a government accepts charity from the industry, it compromises its role as a regulator of the industry. So Botswana actually prohibits partnerships, endorsements, solicitations, and voluntary contributions from the industry. But it's really important that the law is implemented. Otherwise, the industry will undermine this law. In terms of unnecessary interaction with the tobacco industry, Article 5.3 is very clear that governments only interact with the industry when strictly necessary to effectively regulate the industry and its product. So therefore, unnecessary interactions that occurred usually when high-level officials meet with the industry to foster relations or make agreements to collaborate or attend dinner functions or award ceremonies. And we found many such examples where members of parliament or ministers and governors, they even accepted sponsored study visits to tobacco company facilities, and at least 19 governments surveyed, they collaborated with the tobacco industry through accepting memorandum of understanding or providing training sessions or enforcement activities, particularly in the area of tackling illicit trade. For transparency and interaction with the industry, it is important because transparency reduces interference. 14 countries across the globe have got general lobbying laws. They have general register for lobbyists that is accessible to the public, including all those countries that are listed on the slide. For Botswana, your law requires the disclosure or registration of tobacco industry entities, affiliated organizations, and individuals acting on its behalf. However, it's really important that the law is implemented. Otherwise, the industry will send its representatives to meet with your senior officials. Uganda's law, passed in 2015, is one of the strongest as far as Article 5.3 is concerned. However, for the past 10 years, they have actually not really drawn up regulations to implement that section of the law. And it was only recently in March this year did the members of the Uganda National Tobacco Control Committee signed the No Conflict of Interest Declaration aimed at safeguarding public health policy from industry interference. So delay in the implementation of legislation will then benefit the industry. It's important to avoid situations of conflict of interest, and we do have good practice for exit policy in employment. This is really important because the Global Tobacco Index found that there is a revolving door where senior government officials, when they retire, they get appointed as consultants or directors of a tobacco company, or vice versa from the industry consulting for the government. But both Kenya and Uganda have got good exit policy where the officials have to wait. For Kenya, 3 years after leaving public service to work for the industry, and for Uganda, they have to wait for 2 years, and I think Botswana has got similar legislation as well. So countries that have good practice in Article 5.3, it is better to have legislation, and I've provided examples of countries in Africa that have such legislation. Besides Botswana and Uganda that I've mentioned, Chad, has got a decree. Kenya also has got components in their tobacco control regulations, and Ethiopia has got a proclamation that was passed in 2019. And then there are a bunch of about 10 countries in the world that have got either it's a circular or a directive or a code on Article 5.3, which applies to the whole government. However, when you compare legislation with code, legislation is always better, because for legislation, there's penalties involved when there is a violation of the law. So Botswana really needs to ensure that you implement Article 5.3 components of your Tobacco Control Act that was passed in 2021. So just a quick, some examples of what Botswana and Kenya has in terms of transparency measures in interaction with the industry. We know that in the Botswana law, it requires the meetings to be held in public, and that's really good, and for minutes to be recorded. And also the law prohibits contributions from the industry to political parties. However, again, it's important, as was pointed out earlier, that this needs to be implemented. For Kenya, it has also limited interactions very strictly only to those that is strictly necessary, and there's also disclosure requirements if an officer of a public official has got any interest in the tobacco industry, and if they do, they need to divest. Now, an important point I want to make about the Global Tobacco Index is that we compare how the countries performed previously with and with their current performance. So this is a figure from the 2025 Global Tobacco Index, where we have compared the scores of the countries to their current, and we know that for Botswana there is no change. While it means that it's status quo, what we want to see is Botswana improving in the scores, not remaining static, because we want to see the government take action to protect public health by implementing the law, which means that once that is done, then Botswana can actually improve in its score. And it's important to achieve this because, as I mentioned, the tobacco industry will not stop interfering. Therefore, it's important for governments to tighten the measures and implement them effectively. So in conclusion, the government has to act cohesively to ban tobacco industry interference as a whole of government, and the law passed has got to be implemented. And besides implementing the law, it's also really important to raise awareness on Article 5.3 requirements to all sectors of government, and of course then to reject any contribution or CSR activities from the tobacco industry. There are some resources available prepared by GGTC. You can get all of these details on our website. And for Botswana, we have also prepared country fact sheets that you can refer to. With that, thank you very much once again for this opportunity to present, and I wish you well.
As evidenced by the presentation that we just got from Professor Mbongwe, what happens here in Africa is not very different from what the tobacco industry does everywhere else. One of the first things they do is to interfere with policy development and then the implementation of policy. You may have noticed that some years back, the United States government levied the tobacco industry billions of dollars in order to pay for the health needs of people who had disease or health problems emanating from tobacco use. So what the industry then did was to sort of move away to countries that have either no legislation on tobacco control or have very weak laws, so that, you know, they take advantage of those gaps. And in countries where there are laws, they have very, because they have a lot of money, they're able to buy the best lawyers, the best marketers, the best scientists to make their case. So fortunately here in Botswana, it hasn't been that bad. As Mr. Katlolo said earlier, we anticipated this after looking at what they are doing in other countries. In 2017, we trained government lawyers from across the system, from the Attorney General chambers itself, but also lawyers that have been seconded to all government ministries. We trained them on the FCTC, which is like the global template for development of tobacco control laws. In readiness for litigation from the tobacco industry once the law gets approved here, because they always do that. They take governments to court for very strong laws. And so we really have been trying to move a few steps ahead of them, because we know what they can do. But as Professor Mbongwe said it in the report, we have been lucky in the sense that we haven't had too much of tobacco industry interference. It has been a little bit more in some parts of Africa, and that's why a few countries only recently ratified the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, largely because it's a big driver of their economies, and the industry, of course, likes environments like that. And so, yeah, I'll stop at that in response to that question for now.
Mr. Gibbs, I think as a follow-up question, given the UN's broad mandate, I know there's issues of economic development, and your relationship with other organizations, other UN organizations like UNDP, FAO. The tobacco industry has, in some instances, targeted those organizations in progressing its mandate, its profits, rather. How have you linked with those other organizations in terms of educating the other entities that they work with? Because you'll find that, for instance, ATN, we don't necessarily work closely with UNICEF, with UNDP, the way we work with USWHO. So what type of linkages do you have with other UN organizations in building those bridges?
Yes, as the UN, we have a joint work plan that contains what is all the UN agencies domiciled here do to support all of government. And so when we do our planning, these are some of the things that we consider and discuss so that, by and large, we have the same message that we're taking to government, but also that whatever support we're going to provide from our different synergies, we avoid anything that would harm the health and economy of the country.
What we face as challenges that are brought by the industry is that the industry is always working hard to make their statement heard. Like, we do have some interventions like public awareness and making sure that we educate our communities from childhood. But the industry is always making sure that they interfere with whatever the interventions that the government is bringing up. Like, I have just realized as a program officer that now they are going into the community, especially the informal business sector, And they are using them now to de-campaign the initiatives of the government. They give them some gadgets that they can use, and by so doing, they are building trust with the informal sector, and they are now de-campaigning the government initiatives. And by so doing, they make whatever the effort that is brought by the government not to be seen. They also have some products that they bring and say that these products are less harmful. And by so doing, they are buying the interest of the public outside there, so that they trust that their products are more cool, like the language of the youth. They are cool to be used, and they worth the lifestyle of the generation that is being introduced to. And they always, like I said, they always make a statement wherever they are. We were in Palape in February, and we went into the community, the business community. What we found there is not what we expected to see, because they always look around and see how active you are in the field, and we found that they are using whatever they can. They have a paint that they are making a statement with, and they will bring orders with that paint and say, where we have painted with our color, you don't put anything here, you don't display anything, no matter is the trade license is not displayed here. That is a very strong statement against the interventions of the government. And they even make that retailer to contravene with the law, because not displaying a trade license on its own is an offense. So they always do whatever they can, looking at how the steps of the government, and they make sure that they are a bit ahead. But recently we haven't experienced any interference in terms of policy, but we know indirectly they are doing it because they fall under Business Botswana. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you. Indeed, the Action training platform has provided a critical mass of tobacco control advocates the insight to be able to recognize what we otherwise would have not seen as industry interference as they get more and more sophisticated. So what we've done over the time is that bringing together advocates at different platforms over the years, we're now looking at almost 300 advocates across 12 countries in the African region. They've become a network such that when there's an industry interference activity, we've had example of those, they're able to respond in unison as a network with the partnership with ARTCA, who's on ground with many of these alliances. Our training is not just a training on the zone, and I think that's what is most important. It's a training that builds a network of advocates who are able to respond to industry interference. In terms of we've developed a mobile app that allows advocates to be able to report industry interference. The first analysis of that, this is obviously off the press. We're going to be publishing that very soon. It should be coming out in Tobacco Control Journal. But what I can say in terms of summary is that what we have seen as the most common interference that's reported, we analyze about 240 interference incidents across the continent. And for the first time, we're able to look at intensity and compare across countries and explain why interference patterns are different. But what is common across the country is manipulating public opinion. And I think the colleague from the ministry mentioned earlier on, the manipulated public opinion include, for example, publishing in newspapers, working with journalists. You may not know that those journalists are actually on the payroll of tobacco industry. We see a lot of that in the African region. We were able to, for example, follow through some journalists who were funded to go to the UK for science journalism. About 14 of them, and they returned to attend at the World Conference. So you'll be very surprised that many of the things that they write positively about industry and their position, which is very loudly the harm reduction concept, is all written and orchestrated by the tobacco industry. So 40% of the incidents that we recorded were around manipulating public opinion. And we also then, the next common one is actually lobbying legislators. We see many of those in countries that are trying to push for legislation or amend their legislation. And they actually go there, and the trouble or the concern that we see is what seems to be a new sort of imperialistic positioning where the industry comes with US or UK scientists and tell the parliamentarians that these things work in the UK or in the US, and therefore Africa must do it, forgetting that the social and the economic context is very different. So lobbying is a very strong one, of course. We know many of these countries sometimes are very weak with governance, so it's easy sometimes to bribe and to distort evidence. And finally, using the front groups was the third most common evidence that we found from the analysis. So it's one, using public opinion, manipulated public opinion. Two was legislative lobbying, and three, using front group. And of course, all of these three overlap because the same front group are used to lobby and the same front group are used to manipulate public opinion. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Prof. I have a follow-up question for you before I let you go. One of the most rampant forms of interference in Botswana with regards to the tobacco industry has always been how they target government agencies. They single them out. We have had many different cases, Botswana Police, BURS, Ministry of Agriculture, and so on it goes. Are we going to see a team coming to Botswana soon? I know you've been moving around the continent. You were in Zambia last month. We had one of our participants in Zambia this past month. Are you going to see you coming to Botswana soon to build capacity, not just for civil society, but even for government officials? Even if we just pick one, maybe a PRO officer from government to build capacity for them. Is that something that we can start thinking on as ATN, squeezing your hand?
Most certainly, as you know, we indeed try to make sure that we are able to contribute to the tobacco control movement. Importantly, we obviously have vested interest in Botswana being a neighbor to South Africa. If we're able to move the needle in Botswana, we sure be able to move much more faster around the region. So indeed, ATM will be very interested to partner with ATN to provide capacity building within the ministry. In fact, we have been thinking about a focused training for those in government, across government, because one of the reasons why the tobacco industry has been able to do some of the activities that they have been doing is the fact that the sectoral action and the all of government action has not worked as well as she should be. So while the Ministry of Health may be more sensitive to some of this interference, trade, finance, and others, and agriculture may not be. So we're looking at actually focusing on regulators and have them in a room, talk to each other, and maybe make them recognize some of these activities of industry that they are not always as innocent as they think. So maybe Botswana might be one of the places to start that particular targeted training. We would obviously need our partners, ACBF, who has been supporting us, the Africa Capacity Building Foundation, and of course ATN that we've worked with for a very long time. Professor Bontle has been a very strong collaborator. So definitely looking forward to coming to Botswana.
All right. Any last words before I let you go?
No, I think the most important thing is that we need to institutionalize Article 5.3. And we need to make government understand that this is not just about tobacco control, it's about good governance. Because sometimes they see Article 5.3 as just tobacco control. Tobacco control provides avenue to do better, for example, procurement system, because if you use the 5.3 principles alone for your procurement, you will find that you'll have much better outcome for procurement. And so it's not just for health, but everything else. So let us institutionalize Article 5.3. That's the only way that we can move forward with tobacco control. And I see Botswana can take leadership in this.
Yesterday and the day before, we had the technical working group on tobacco control developing a national multi-sectoral strategy for tobacco control. It's an ongoing process which will include validation of the draft strategy by the different stakeholders that are involved. The technical working group itself has representatives from across government, from civil society, and that's the approach that we want, even at implementation level. The example that Kangangwani gave about Palape, we had also assembled officers from all government sectors that are key towards tobacco control to develop capacity in that. And we also, earlier than that, a week earlier than that, we had been developing guidelines on tobacco cessation for those that are using tobacco already and would like to quit. You may know that it's difficult to find those services in the country, except for Bosasnet and one or two other civil society organizations that do a bit more advocacy than providing the necessary service to quit. And so we know that it takes a lot of strategies, actually, a lot of interventions to achieve the results. One of the things, as you know, there is the tobacco control levy. One of the things we are pushing for is for it to be increased so that government gets a bit more revenue from it, especially given the circumstances that we find ourselves in, but also so that then more of those funds can fund other sectors to play their role, including civil society organizations and other activities that may emanate from the communities, because we want, at the end of the day, the communities themselves to be the ones pushing for whatever reviews, whatever improvements are needed in laws, but also in implementation of services to them. So Yes, those are some of the things that are happening. I just also wanted to indicate that even as I gave an example of the lawyers that we trained, we are not only looking at one side of the law. We trained lawyers that would go to court to litigate. We trained drafters, I think they call them draftsmen, at the Attorney General's chambers who draft laws. But we also, and I need to be careful here, we also oriented a senior judge, a senior magistrate. Now that's, the people who will be listening to the cases as they come to court. So that, we train people right across the system to try and, get a system that will equitably, first of all, but also effectively deal with issues that relate to tobacco control, including interference from the industry. But we also have our good friends from the media. What you are doing today, transmitting this to people across the country and across the world, actually, you are educating the people. It's an important role that you play. So there's a role to play for everybody, for every sector, for all of us as individuals, as communities, and all in our different professional spaces. We all have a role, and the strategy that I was referring to, you look at it, you'll see yourself in there, you'll know, how you can contribute towards this. Thank you.
Concerning coordination, we are doing our best to strengthen it. We just recently developed the cessation guidelines, which will standardize the services of cessation wherever they are being provided, either by the civil society, the government health facilities, the private health facilities. And we are in the process of training the service providers on those guidelines when they are finished or they are completed. I'm referring to guidelines which we are to complete in a month's time, and they will be in use. So capacity building will be done so that the services are delivered in a standard manner. We also developed a tobacco control strategy, which then will coordinate all activities, and it includes everyone. It is an inclusive strategy. It includes the private sector, the NGOs, and the government departments which are delivering tobacco control services. And we do not forget the academia, because they are the resource center of these initiatives in terms of coming up with data that also guide the interventions and make them target interventions and timely interventions. So we are working towards that. And the strategy I'm talking about is also, I could say it's almost 80% complete. We are only left with a few steps, and it will be also into implementation. So we are doing all what we can to make sure that coordination is done properly and is documented.
As I was walking to the podium, to give my vote of thanks. I read in bold letters, there is a banner there by Anti-Tobacco Network. It is written clear, tobacco harms families and communities. And underneath it, it is written again in bold red letters. It causes heart diseases, it causes lung diseases, it causes stroke. And a striking figure adjacent to those, 1,188 deaths, tobacco-related deaths in Botswana in 2025. We have a mammoth task in front of us, a very big task. And I'm happy that Anti-Tobacco Network, as one of our implementing partners, focusing on tobacco use in our country, is doing a marvelous job. A round of applause to Anti-Tobacco Network. The Director of Ceremonies, let me continue by thanking you for the marvelous work for directing the proceedings. A round of applause to the Director of Ceremonies. And also thank Honorable Minister for eloquently detailing the intentions of the government as far as tobacco use is concerned in our country. A round of applause to that as well. And also thank Dr. Mary Assunta as she presented, detailing on the intentions around the policies on tobacco use. Professor Mbongwe, you see, I was glad when the Director of Ceremonies reminded us that you once scooped an award. A round of applause to Prof. The Executive Director of Anti-Tobacco Network, our leader, you are doing a very good job. And let me also thank the panelists who eloquently detailed their points of argument. And all of us here were listening attentively. A round of applause to you. Once again, let me thank the media, the production crew, those who are normally left behind when we give vote of thanks, because they are the ones who bring to us the beautiful pictures of every event as a reference material. A round of applause to them. And as they always say, it is through visuals that we view or see the reality of mankind exhibit itself to the fullest. Last. A round of applause to you, colleagues, for being with us here tonight. We thank you so much. And we are saying, again, when we call tomorrow, please, we expect you here. Thank you so much. Good night and God bless.